Okay, it is time for History with Mr. V. All right. Glad to have you back. For the next two or three episodes of this, we are going to be getting into Reconstruction, probably the most critical and most confusing period in American history. There's a lot of stuff going on in Reconstruction. It kind of goes like really 1864 because they started looking into that a little bit before the end of the Civil War to 1877. And it was like 12, 13 years. There's a lot of stuff packed in there. They also really love to have this on the AP exam with Reconstruction. So we're going to want to make sure that we're pretty solid on understanding this material. So we're going to kind of go through today a little bit of background with Reconstruction, what that is, what's going on, some problems, and then we'll kind of start getting into in our next episode. A lot of the nuts and bolts type stuff, like okay, here's what happened, here's why this is important, all that kind of cool stuff. So let's go ahead and get into this. All right. So first we have kind of like what was Reconstruction? The biggest problems were is getting the South back into the Union. Those states that had seceded, kind of bringing them back in. And then the question was, how are they going to come back? We're just going to say, okay, you're back in Union. Great to have you again. Or are there going to be some requirements they have to meet? The other problem, probably the biggest pressing problem is what to do with the freedmen, with the former slaves. Okay, how to bring them into society as free people. Then, of course, the question of, what rights are they going to have, voting rights, other rights, what's going to happen here. That wasn't as easy as it sounds either. That really brought on a lot of controversy about Reconstruction. So let's get into some background, a little bit of a contextualization, if you will. I know you guys don't know what contextualization is. So at the end of the Civil War, the South is devastated in every sense of the word. A lot of the war had been fought in the South, particularly in Virginia. A lot of the farmland was destroyed. A lot of the cities were destroyed. General William Tecumseh Sherman, with his march to the sea, had gone through South Carolina and Georgia and destroyed everything in their path. So a lot of literally the cities need to be rebuilt, the towns rebuilt. There's tens of thousands of refugees, Southern people who were displaced from their homes, who are wandering the roads, wandering the South. You've got Confederate veterans coming back. Um, Obviously, we have a lot of freedmen who have left their plantations and are kind of wandering, trying to find, where are we going to build our new life? So you've got a huge problem there. The other problem is the labor force of the South was decimated. I think over 480,000 Southerners were killed during the Civil War, either in battle or disease, things like that. And that's a big part of your labor force. Your military age people, kind of that 18 to, at the time, 45 age, that's your working age population. So not only is the economy devastated, but a lot of their workforce is gone. Those men that would come back and, go back into the shops and the stores and the farms and things like that. They're gone. And even the ones that aren't killed have been wounded terribly, like amputations, things like that. Or shattered emotionally or mentally and not really fit to work, not able to work. So you have that problem. The other problem is unlike in the North, where the soldiers came back home in the northern states and had jobs and prosperity ahead of them, in the South, there really weren't any jobs. A lot of those places, like we said, the farms, the factories, things like that, had been destroyed. So you had to rebuild it economically as well. So that was a big problem. Okay. So you have some competing forces as well, kind of with Reconstruction. They really weren't on the same page as what to do. Okay. So you had President Lincoln who wanted an easier reconstruction. He was one that was very much I think his quote was with malice towards none and charity towards all. He felt that after 4 years of civil war, that the South had been punished and hurt enough. He kind of thought we don't need to go and kind of hurt them more. He wanted an easier reconstruction with the South, and his plan was what was called the 10% plan, where after 10% of the male population had swore loyalty to the Union and recognized that slavery was over, then they could go back to their state, form their state governments and have their state legislatures and elect all those folks. He wanted a much easier Reconstruction. Congress was split. Um, Kind of after during the war years, Congress was split. You had the radical Republicans. I remember Lincoln was a Republican. Yeah, the radical Republicans, and they didn't really agree with how Lincoln was pursuing the war. They wanted, and his 10% plan, they wanted the South to be punished, even beyond the war. Like they wanted this to be a much harsher, more difficult Reconstruction. They definitely wanted the freedmen to have rights, voting rights, and other rights that Americans had at the time. And they didn't agree with Lincoln's 10% plan because part of his plan was also where the freedmen would not have those rights. Um, so they wanted a more difficult one. You had what were called peace Democrats, kind of known as Copperheads. They kind of turned on the government, and they wanted to kind of sue for a peace with the South. All right, and we're talking this is 1864, so this is like after 3 years of war, they're pretty tired of this, so they said they wanted to reach some kind of a settlement with the South. So you had that group of people. Then you had the Republicans like that followed Lincoln, who were really kind of called the Union Republicans or the Unionists. And what they wanted is they were kind of a lot of different people. You had the Republicans that agreed with Lincoln, that followed Lincoln, what he wanted. Then you had what were called War Democrats that wanted to continue the war, and wanted to see the slaves freed. And then you had some border state unionists, people from like Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, like that, who were unionists, wanted to see the Union repaired, reconstructed. And they supported Lincoln also during the Civil War. So in the election of 1864, you had three different groups. Again, you had the Republicans with Lincoln, who ran Lincoln as their candidate. You had the Peace Democrats, who ran a guy named George McClellan, who had been a general during the Civil War that Lincoln had pretty much fired for being ineffective. And then you had the radical Republicans, who ran a guy, John C. Fremont. And you might remember John C. Fremont earlier. He'd had a big part in California before in the 1840s, with the kind of the revolution, the bloodless revolution there. So obviously Lincoln wins the election in 1864, but in Congress there is a split. So Congress isn't even on the same page as far as Reconstruction goes. And of course, the Southerners, a lot of them, when those states seceded, they left their positions as representatives or senators. So those folks weren't back in Senate yet. So in this election, now here's what's kind of funny, funny, haha, but kind of funny, weird, is Abraham Lincoln in 1864 chose as his vice presidential candidate a guy named Andrew Johnson from Tennessee. And Johnson had been a senator. And when Tennessee seceded, Johnson was the only one that did not resign his position in the Senate. He stayed. He was a unionist, wanted to keep the Union together. He hated the slavocracy of the South and the planter class that pretty much dominated the South, in all ways, economically, socially, and politically. He hated that. And Lincoln chose him, number one, because being from Tennessee, and here's the funny thing, Johnson was a Southern Democrat, all right, and Lincoln's a Republican. So a lot of people were like, "Whoa, whoa, what's going on with this? Why are you choosing this guy?" And it kind of made sense because what Lincoln believed what could happen here is that by choosing Johnson, that it would show the South that this Reconstruction kind of trying to help them out. Say this is going to be an easy, kind of a more easy, lenient. It's not going to be a harsh Reconstruction on the South. So he's trying to kind of play to the South and say, hey, we have one of your own as vice president. So, he's going to be playing a big part in this Reconstruction plan. So trying to get some trust from the Southern states to when they're being reconstructed, brought back into the Union. So anyway, then you have the Southern states. They wanted a quick Reconstruction. They wanted, let's be reconstructed now, and then they wanted to continue pretty much with the way things had gone on. So anyway, so with all this, you've got the freedmen caught in the middle. All right. The big thing is trying to bring them back into society as freed people, and they're going to be kind of stuck. And we're going to see time and again where they're really going to kind of pay the price for a lot of this kind of miscommunication, people not being on the same page, that kind of thing. All right. So anyway, so what the Republican or the radical Republicans rather did as a opposition of Lincoln's 10% plan is they had what was called the Wade Davis bill. And this was sponsored by two guys, Benjamin Davis of Ohio and Henry Wade of Maryland. And this was reflecting the radical Republicans' desire to punish the South. So rather than 10% of the male population swearing a loyalty oath, like Lincoln wanted, they wanted 50%. But that's going to be kind of harder to get. And on top of that, those that 50% had to also swear that they had never assisted the Confederacy during the Civil War, which that's going to be really hard because a lot of the male population had either fought for the Confederacy, a lot of them had been in top leadership positions in the Confederate military. Some had actually been, in the Confederate legislature in positions there. So getting that 50% was going to be a much harder, kind of a harder thing to get, which that was the point. Um, Wade Davis and the other radical Republicans did not want to see a South that was going to be reconstructed easily. And of course, on top of that was they had to swear that yes, slavery is done forever. So that was part of that. Now, what happened is Congress did pass the Wade Davis bill. All right. But Lincoln vetoed it. All right. He actually was a pocket veto. It's sort of like okay, I'm going to put this in the desk drawer and I'm not going to sign it. And then the congressional session ended without him vetoing it. So it became nothing. So kind of what happens then, and this is all in the end of 1864, in December of 1864. And at the same time, we're still fighting the Civil War, which ends in April of 1865. And as we know, Lincoln chooses to go to the theater on that night and is assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Now, what this assassination, really kind of opens up a whole problem because Lincoln had assumed, and Johnson had kind of said that he would follow. Initially, he said he would follow Lincoln's 10% plan. As it turns out, he doesn't. He does not support civil rights for freed slaves, the freedmen. He really kind of goes against the radical Republicans. And what we're going to see is there's going to be a lot of problems between the radical Republicans and President Johnson, who is now in Lincoln's term until 1868. So in these beginning years of Reconstruction, Johnson is now kind of in the White House, and he and the radical Republicans are going to have a lot of battles. And what's going to happen? The biggest problem now is who's going to run Reconstruction? Is it going to be the president? Is it going to be Congress, meaning the radical Republicans? Or is it going to be the Southern states themselves? Are they going to be the ones who are kind of in charge of their own Reconstruction and kind of let Congress know when they feel they're ready to be allowed back in the Union or kind of seen as full-fledged states once again? So that's kind of the problem we have right now as we're kind of sitting here, as we're going to wrap this first session up with our background information here. So kind of what we're looking at next time is we're going to start getting into kind of the big, I don't know, the big ideas in Reconstruction. And some of those things we're going to get into is number one, called the Freedmen's Bureau, because with the freedmen, remember they need a place, they need food, clothing, shelter. I mean, they've been on these plantations their whole lives in a lot of cases and don't know how to do freedom. They don't have a place to live anymore unless they stay on a plantation. And many did, and he stayed on the plantations. So Congress going to create what's called the Freedmen's Bureau, which is actually was a great idea. And it was meant to help the freedmen find food, clothing, shelter, also education. Try to get them educated, not just their children, but the adult freedmen themselves. So we're kind of see what happens with that. We're kind of get more into this conflict between Johnson and radical Republicans. It actually almost ends in impeachment. They try to remove Johnson from office because of this. And we're going to get with problems with Reconstruction in the South, like what's going on there. Because we're going to see that Reconstruction, at least initially, was not really enforced in the South. And the South wants to kind of continue where they left off before the Civil War. And that's going to cause some problems with Reconstruction being implemented in the Southern states. And then we're going to get to the 14th and 15th Amendments. We already, kind of looked at the 13th Amendment in the last unit there, that, where slavery was outlawed, and that was ratified in January of 1865. We're now going to get into the 14th and 15th Amendments, the other two of the three so-called Civil War amendments, and what their importance is. So that's what we're going to be looking at next time. So until then, this has been, everybody say it with me now, History with Mr. V. All right, and we will see you next time. Adios.